So let's also follow up about Libya, Lewis. We started talking about Libya on Monday's show, and there were a number of different considerations. One that we are starting to hear now relates to oil production and gas prices. We actually spoke just before the show to Alyona Minkovski from RT's The Alyona Show just about that and about media coverage of Libya and the frantic gas price, oil price coverage and lack of disclosure. So let's get to that interview right now. Alyona Minkovski from RT's The Alyona Show is joining us today. Great to see you, Alyona.
You too, David. Thanks for having me on.
So we've been talking about Libya, and now we're starting to get news that the supply of oil is going to maybe be affected. We're seeing oil prices going up, and right away we're seeing gas prices go up in the U.S. Without talking about the supply-demand of oil, I've been following the media coverage of this story, and I'm curious to get your take about why, when we hear about oil prices are going up and down, gas prices are going up and down, there's no discussion of, number one, the fact that there is so much speculative action on this, and that in great part we can point to the Wall Street collapse, and the playing on futures and gambling on derivatives is a huge part of this. And number two, we will never hear media outlets say that the oil companies are big-time advertisers on their networks. Talk about that a little bit.
David, I mean, I hate to say it, but are you really surprised that we don't hear that coming from the mainstream media? They never do this. You know, they have been covering, of course, the unrest in the Middle East. They've been covering the situation in Libya, and they always seem to transition then to rising oil prices without really going in to any of the details, to any of the reason perhaps why we're so dependent on foreign oil. And, you know, I think that what the media really does is, in terms of what you're saying about the fact that so much of this is speculation, right? That at the moment, there isn't an oil shortage. At the moment, Saudi Arabia is saying that they're going to pick up all of Libya's slack. However, you know, unrest may spread to Saudi Arabia as well. We're not really sure exactly what's going to go on there. But, you know, the media is a panic machine, a fearmonger machine. And so what we hear when we see these experts come on is the exact same line being told to freak Americans out, to tell them the oil prices are going to rise. That means that your wallet's going to get hit hard at the pump. And, well, you have corporate media in a country like you do in America. When you look at the cable channels, then of course they're not going to talk about the control that oil companies have over the U.S. government, how they're, you know, in bed with each other. They're not going to talk about the fact that these companies advertise on their own channels because it's all about money, and the news is a business these days.
Well, the other thing that's interesting, too, is that there's no discussion of the fact that, like you said, it's going to hit consumers. Well, what about a discussion of the fact that when the oil price changes, the companies that are refining the oil and drilling it and transporting it and turning it into gasoline, they're not taking the hit. In fact, their profits are very high. It's really the worker, the consumer, the guy who is filling up his gas tank, who is taking the hit. That is, I don't know that I would call it an attack on the working class, but it's completely off the radar of the gas price discussions.
I would say that it's not an attack on the working class. It's just part of the class war going on against them. And, you know, I think it's interesting here to look at the budget debate that we see going on in the U.S., the fact that Barack Obama is toying with the idea of starting to, you know, cut out some of those reductions in taxes for oil companies. But now that we have prices rising, I'm pretty sure that you're not going to see that anymore. It's not going to work. And not to mention the fact that our government is, you know, we're hearing warnings of a government shutdown. They're completely dysfunctional at the moment. And so at the end of the day, of course, it's going to be the American consumer that ends up paying, even if we look at what's going on now, because those, you know, ending the reductions for taxes for oil companies are going to go out the window. And Republicans are just going to start saying, drill, baby, drill. It's already something that we're seeing coming out from Republican lawmakers. We're seeing it in op-eds. We saw Glenn Beck rambling about it last night, saying, if I was Barack Obama, I would have started drilling 2 weeks ago. And yeah, no one's going to talk about that. At the end of the day, it's the consumer, it's the little guy, it's the American worker that's going to get hit hard, because that's where the cuts are going to be made. And that's, you know, where it's going to trickle down to, because no one's going to dare touch the profits of the oil companies.
I would actually argue that some of the corporate media coverage of this and lack of disclosure is really creating some unnecessary, definitely frantic behavior on the part of consumers. I mean, we see SUV sales rise and fall within months of, you know, $50, $75 changes per gallon in gas. I did some math. If you actually get, if for the average 12,000 mile a year driver, an extra 5 miles per gallon really only works out to about $60 in savings per month. And think about if you're changing your car because of some media reports about gas prices. There's transaction costs. The car itself may be more expensive. So I worry about some of the consumers that are being bamboozled, in a sense, by this day-to-day news.
Well, I think that we have to worry about the consumers perhaps and what choices they make in terms of what cars they're going to buy. But I think the bigger risk here is, are consumers going to be buying cars at all? If you, start seeing oil prices surge and you start seeing gas prices surge, then consumer spending is going to go down. And the entire, notion of this recovery that we're going through is going to be put into jeopardy, because at the end of the day, in order for the economy to recover, it really depends on consumer spending. And so consumers are no longer going to feel confident about that. They're going to start penny pinching. And if consumer spending is down, then of course there's uncertainty in the market, and that means companies aren't going to be hiring, which means unemployment is going to continue on. So I think the car thing is, that's later down the line. At the moment, we have to realize that this is going to hurt the economy.
Real quick before we go here, Fox News, when they mention a story from the Wall Street Journal, they say owned by the parent company of this network. If a media outlet takes advertising dollars from oil companies, when they report on those stories, should they have to say, we receive sponsorship dollars from this company?
If you're asking me, then absolutely, I believe that you should have to disclose those types of things. I mean, I think that, if we even bring up Citizens United here, when it comes to campaign contributions, I think that politicians should be forced to disclose who their donors are. I think the organizations like the Chamber of Commerce should be forced to disclose who their donors are. And I think the media organizations should absolutely be forced to disclose who is paying, who the advertisers are on their channel, because otherwise, how do you trust what they're going to say? There's no such thing then as being unbiased, and I think that the consumer or the viewer, if it comes to the media, needs to be aware of.
Oh, and I think we might have just lost Alyona. Can you still hear me, Alyona? We didn't. All right, you know what? I'm glad we got the interview done. Thanks to our Alyona Minkovski from RT's The Alyona Show, and we'll have her back on soon. Take a break. Be back after this.